Welcome to everyone joining into this specific webinar. I think it's always good that we continuously invest in our professional development, and I'm excited to see quite a lot of you guys on the call, so welcome. Just a brief introduction about myself. My name is Tendai, as Mackenzie said. I'm currently practicing as a course instructor at McEwan School of Continuing Education. I'm also practicing as a business analysis consultant, as well as a curriculum developer. I teach business analysis courses as well as project management courses. I am a certified business analysis professional. I'm also quite into the agile space, so I'm a certified Scrum product owner as well as a certified Scrum Master. And I also hold several degrees in information systems, which is all related to my current profession. Okay, so let's get straight into the webinar. I'm sure a lot of you guys saw the title of the webinar is that the critical ingredient to project success, right? Which is really stakeholder management, right? So I'm sure a lot of people are asking why stakeholder management, right? So really the importance of stakeholders can never ever be underestimated, right? The success or the failure of any project really relies on efficient and effective stakeholder management, right? Stakeholder management really plays that crucial role in the successful delivery of any single project, right? So you want to involve your stakeholders to provide expertise. You know, stakeholders become your advocates, they become your change agents, right? And you need to have them on your side. You need to win them over so you can really go ahead and have that project success that everyone is looking for, right? Stakeholders really are at the center of any single project that we do, right? Projects, they've got the power to either impede, so they can block, right, a project, or they can promote a project. So really that speaks to the importance of stakeholder management. Traditionally, I think a lot of organizations really adopted a passive approach towards stakeholder management, right? So it was really, you know, probably we do it in newsletters, we tell people about the updates of the project in newsletters or whatever it may be, right? Traditional forums. But increasingly over the past number of years, there's been that rise in realizing that when it comes to stakeholder management, you want to be proactive. You want to actively involve these stakeholders, right, in the decision-making process, especially when it comes to developing new products. So really, you want to have stakeholders on your side, right? Let me just lay the context before we go into the specific strategies, right? So who are your stakeholders? A lot of people are like, who are my stakeholders, right? You probably, most of us are running with projects that are spanning multiple business areas, or, you know, that got quite a lot of people involved. So it's very important just to have an understanding of who your stakeholders are, right? So those could be your immediate project team members. So I'm talking about you yourself as a project manager, if you are managing projects, you know, business analysts, you've got software developers, you've got quality assurance, you've got UX designers, right? So project team members are the people who are actually doing the work, right? Then you've got your internal stakeholders, who are your project sponsor, right? The person who's providing the budget for the project, right? The PMO, any domain SME, right? Subject matter expert, any end user that will be using, if it's an IT system change that you're doing or a system new feature, right? Any end user and any other employee within the organizations, those are your internal stakeholders, right? Then you've got your contractors or your suppliers. These are all the contractors, the suppliers, these are all the external people as well that really are involved in facilitating project outcomes. Then you've got your external stakeholders, which really could be your local government, it could be local communities, it could be external investors, right? NGOs, again, these are external. So really just laying the foundation of who are stakeholders before we take a deep dive into the strategies and the techniques, right? So I just want to really also put more on the context, right? I found these really great statistics that speak to, you know, the importance of stakeholder management and why I'm calling it the critical ingredient for project success, right? So 62% of successfully completed projects, right, had active supportive sponsors, right? You want to make sure that you've got people on your side. You want to make sure that people are traveling the journey with you as a project manager, right, to achieve project success. Right. In another survey, right, 78% of respondents said that they like business stakeholders to be more responsive, to be more engaged in the project. So you can see as project managers, people, I think we are slowly realizing that it's very important to have business on your side. It's very important to have your stakeholders inside. You do not exist in silo. You do not exist in a vacuum. You operate within an ecosystem, and you need to make sure that you understand who those people are and how you can get their buy-in and win them over, right? right? Also, another study, University of Ottawa PMI, 33% of projects fail because of a lack of involvement from senior management. I mean, that's big, okay? 33%. Think of the time, think of the effort, think of the amount of resources that's going into these projects, right? I'm speaking mostly from an IT perspective because that's my industry, but projects can happen in the construction world, in the academic world, right? Any single project that you're working on, this is the real stats that are showing you that there are project failures, and stakeholder management is attributed. Lack of stakeholder management or ineffective stakeholder management, right, is really contributing to that failure. So I thought these were fantastic statistics to show and to paint the picture and to lay the foundation of what we're going to discuss a bit later on, right? I really love this case study. For those of you who don't know, I've put the source here. I'm sure Mackenzie will be sharing the slide deck afterwards, right? Denver International Airport in the United States, right? So they had a goal for a brand new automated system, right, to handle luggage transfers and travel, right? Their goal was really to replace the standard reliance on manual labor with a fully automated baggage system that would integrate, a lot of terminals, right? They wanted to reduce aircraft turnaround and faster, service to travelers, right? So these are all of the goals, the objectives they had with this specific system, right? So what happened, right? Project really went 16 months past initial deadline, right? They went $560 million over budget, right? Those are some serious numbers there, right? And they didn't deliver on the full automation goal, right? So when it comes to time, when it comes to cost, when it comes to quality, right? Those measures that we as project managers look at to say whether our project is successful or not, you can actually see that in this instance, unfortunately, there was no success, right? So the project team really, there were consequences afterwards. They had to build a manual system. There was only one airline that adopted this new system. After 10 years, they bowed out and it's now decommissioned, right? So what are the key lessons? Of course, stakeholder management was one of them. There's also a lot of other lessons. But the one key thing that came out of this specific case study is that they did not involve airlines that were renting space in the airport, right? So they were busy doing it amongst themselves as a project team within the international airport themselves, but they did not consult initially, right, those airlines. They did not include them in the initial decision making. And by the time they did include them, they realized that there were so many requirements that they did not cater for, right? It was way too late. So this case study, again, illustrating the value of including your stakeholders upfront, illustrating the value of trying to understand who are my stakeholders, right? And how do I engage them early on to make sure that I've got project success, right? Again, I've put the source. You can go and you can read more about the specific case study, validating the important ingredients of stakeholder management, right? So I've laid the foundation. I've presented some statistics to you, right, in terms of why stakeholders management is important. I've given you a case study that shows, how they did not include stakeholder management into this specific project. They didn't include them upfront and what happened, right? So now I want to kind of like give you some tips, some strategies, which I'm sure a lot of you are on the call for, right? How do you as a project manager or as a person working within the project space, right, really enable effective stakeholder management? So I've got 5 tips for you, right? The first one for me is really going back to the start, right? At the start of the project, at the beginning of the project, right? Ensure that you really identified the right stakeholders, right? Identifying the right stakeholders will reduce and uncover risks, right? It will increase buy-in, right? And when stakeholders are adequately engaged, right, their influence really goes far and wide, right? If I take an example in my own projects that I've worked on in the past, right? Initially, right, we didn't involve specific stakeholders, and by the time we did it, it was way too late, right? So we actually realized that just bringing them up front, making them aware of the goals, the objective, making them aware of what is in it for them right from the start, right, can really set you up for project success, right? So a lot of you guys might be asking, how do I do that? How do I identify the right stakeholders, right? So there's several techniques that you can use, and for those of you who are familiar with the project management book of knowledge, right, that's really the encompassing body of knowledge for project management, they list all of these techniques. I've just put here a few, right? Expert judgment, which is really selecting approach people in the organizations, right? In the organization that you are in, within the specific project sphere that you're doing, right? To get the list of stakeholders, right? You can have brainstorming, bring a couple of people together, right? You want to generate as multiple ideas as possible in a short period of time, right? You can set up a survey or questionnaire, right? Where you're highlighting this is the nature of the change, this is our objectives, this is our goals, right? Will your department be affected? How do you think it will be affected, right? I find that a questionnaire is a great way to just start doing it, issuing it. There's so much things that we can use, platforms that we can use, right? A questionnaire is a great tool to start identifying your right stakeholders, right? You can ask your sponsor. I mean, your sponsor is really sponsoring the project, right? They'll be able to tell you, or your project team, if they're people who've been in the organization for a long time, as well as checking the organizational charts. I'm sure most organizations have organizational charts, right? So the first thing that you want to do is identify the right stakeholders, right? Very important. A lot of people think I've identified my stakeholders, I'm good to go. Let's start with the project. I always say there's, when it comes to stakeholder management, it's actually systematic approach, right, to really identifying, analyzing, planning, and implementing actions, right, for any project success. So you want to be able to analyze your stakeholders. And what do I mean by analyze the stakeholders, right? So first of all, you need to understand their roles. A lot of us have probably heard of the term RACI, right? RACI is who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed, right? So it's just not enough to just say, this is the list of my stakeholders. That's fine, right? What is their responsibility? Are you going to keep them accountable? Are you going to keep them consulted? Are you going to keep them informed? Again, these are great tips, techniques that you can learn if you do come onto our project management courses, right? You want to understand the attitudes, right? Again, like I said, attitudes can really make or break a project, right? Positive or negative attitudes. You want to be able to see who's got negative attitudes, right? How do I help them to win them over? A few slides later, I'm going to go into handling people who are resistant to your project. How do you kind of like get their buy-in? So I'll share tips there, right? You want to understand the authority levels, right? Who makes the key decisions in this specific project, right? And then you want to understand power and influence. Very important. Who's got the influence? Who exerts power, right? And who makes the key decisions, right? What you see on the left-hand side of my screen, I'm not sure what side it is for you guys, but really is what we call the stakeholder power interest grid, right? Depending on the level of power, depending on the level of interest, you want to put in some strategies, some interventions to make sure that you get these people on your corner, right? So anyone who's got high power and high interest, you want to manage them closely. You want to make sure you fully engage these people. You want to make the greatest efforts, right, to satisfy them. This is it, right? And then anyone who's got high power, right? So high power as well as less interested, right? You want to keep these stakeholders satisfied. You want to put enough work, right, with these people to keep them satisfied. Anyone with low power, right, and high interest, very important. You want to keep them informed, right? You want to adequately inform these people and talk to them to ensure that no major issues are rising, right? And then, of course, low power, low interest. Again, you want to monitor them, but you also don't want to overdose them with a lot of communication, right? So this really shows the importance of not only identifying your stakeholders, but analyzing your stakeholders. That can really go a long way towards keeping your stakeholders engaged, right? Also very important is understanding your communication needs for your stakeholders, right? No one stakeholder is the same. People have got different communication needs. People are busy with other projects. Most of the times when we're working with internal business users, right, they've got their day-to-day job that they're doing, and they are working as well on your project, right? So time is a real constraint for your project, for your stakeholders. So you want to make sure that you understand their communication needs and tailor that communication. What does that involve, right? The first thing is what needs to be communicated, right? So the what is very important. You don't want to over communicate to a point where someone does see your email, they skip it because you've been sending so many emails. So you need to really decide, right? What am I going to be communicating? What's the key information that I as a project manager will be communicating, right, with my stakeholders, right? You then want to understand the delivery method, right? How will the communication be delivered, right? Is it electronic? Is it verbal? Is it written? Is it on some collaboration tool, right? Now that we're virtual, most of us are virtual. So really understanding the delivery method, because again, not everyone is on their emails most of the time. Not everyone is on these collaboration tools, right? So maybe they want a quick chat, whatever works for your stakeholders, right? You understand the timing as well. When should the communication occur, as well as the frequency, how often, right? Remember I said you don't want to over communicate or over bombard them with information, right? You want to understand the level of detail, right? How much detail is required for the communication? Sometimes if it's senior management, maybe it's just a one slider that's got key points, versus if it's end users who are going to be using the system, you want to make it more detailed, right? So understanding the level of detail and tailoring that according to your specific stakeholders, and then also understanding the level of formality, right? There's some people who really want it to be formal. There's some people you can have a whole way conversation in passing and they confirm what needs to be confirmed, right? So understand that level of formality. So stakeholder communication, very important. It fits into what's called a communication plan, right? That project managers do, which again is a whole detailed communication plan to ensure that you've got your stakeholders really understanding what everything is about in the project, right? Also, once you've communicated, once you've identified, once you've analyzed your stakeholders, again, you want to continuously engage your stakeholders. I think I came across a quote that says, stakeholder engagement is not a once-off process. It's a continuous exercise. It's a continuous exercise of really relationship building. Those are the key words, right? When it comes to stakeholder engagement, how do I, as a project manager, build relations, right, with my stakeholders so I've got them. I think of it like you are in a car, you've got a destination, right, to deliver a specific project. You don't want to be dropping off people at various sidewalks, right? You want to drive all the way with your stakeholders in your car to the end, right? So how do you make sure you continuously engage your stakeholders, right? So you want to make sure that, first of all, you want to manage expectations, right? The worst thing is to have a stakeholder saying, I thought we were going to be doing this. I thought this was going to be happening, right? So managing expectations speaks to three things when I think about it: assumptions, dependencies, and constraints. As a stakeholder, as a project manager, you want to make sure that you're always aware of what are the assumptions, right, that are going on right now. What are the dependencies, if there are any, right? And if there are any constraints, because being proactive and having that in mind, right, you're able to manage expectations, right? You want to be able to collaborate, right? Collaboration is is something that just doesn't even fall under engagement. It is a continuous thing from day one, right? Collaboration is gaining agreement, right? Gaining consensus, getting people in your corner. So collaboration, very key, right? You want to be able to resolve issues, right? Where issues come up in the project, right? You want to make sure that at the end of the day, you're able to resolve it, whether within the project team or with your external stakeholders, right? You want to make sure that you maintain what we call a RAID log, right? A risks, actions, and dependencies, as well as issues, right? You want to make sure that you maintain that list so that you continuously update it, right? You want to be able to prioritize, right? Throughout the project, there's going to be competing priorities, especially when it comes to business requirements, especially when it comes to stakeholder needs, right? What is the method of prioritization that you are going to use in your projects? Again, there are several techniques that you can use to prioritize. There's Moscow, there's high, medium, low, what we call t-shirt sizing, right? So depending on your organization, depending on the techniques that work for your organization, there's so many techniques, but you want to take what's custom towards what you're doing. You want to be able to prioritize. Very important, finally, you want to problem solve. This I cannot emphasize enough, right? I always say whenever we leave problems, it's like you are really just letting things keep on growing. It's like it starts off as a small golf ball and then it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So you want to make sure that you get down to the root cause of problems. So many times people are solving symptoms of problems and not really the underlying cause. So as a project manager, it's important to work with your business analyst, to work with your project team to really make sure that you get to the root cause, solve that problem in order to keep the ship moving, right? You don't want to keep problems under the bay because they will always surface time and time again, right? So what are some of the strategies you can use to engage your stakeholders, right? You can have conversations, phone calls, meetings, right? product demos, right? For those of you who are aware of what Agile is all about, right? Agile really has that continuous improvement, that continuous feedback loop with your customers as your external stakeholders. So you want to really get on top of that, right? You want to use your stakeholders in any risk response. If there are any risks that are raised, right? How are you going to respond to those risks, right? You don't want to make those decisions by yourself as a project manager. You want to make sure that you've got your stakeholders involved in that, right? So continuously engaging your stakeholders is number 4. And then the 5th tip is you want to monitor stakeholder engagement, right? Again, it's not important. It's just not making sure that you prioritize. It's not making sure that you identify and analyze. You want to be able to monitor stakeholder engagement throughout the project, right? People's level of authority may change, right? People change roles. You know, how does that affect the project? When it comes to engagement, are people still engaged, right? And check, very important, check that communication still is happening, still goes on within the organization. Because at the end of the day, yes, you might have a project, especially those people who are leading big projects, right? You might think that because it's a big project, you might make the assumption that people already know what it's about, but you want to keep the lines of communication going. Right. So I'm sure the key question that's coming about is really, how about difficult stakeholders, right? How do I go about dealing with such difficult stakeholders? And let's face it, in organizations, so what strategies can you use to win these stakeholders over? I think first and foremost, I've put this is really empathize, right? Before you jump into any assumption as to why they are acting a certain way or negatively, right? You want to walk their shoes, understand their pain points, understand their problems, right? You really want to make sure that you get to know why, right? I always say you can't solve something without understanding why, right? So once you understand the why, right? Really explain what is in it for them, right? To be actively involved in the project. Most of the time, stakeholders don't see the benefit. How will this benefit my department? Why do I need to be there, right? So you want to be able to highlight the value. Very important, the concept of value. You want to highlight the value that this project will be giving to the specific stakeholders, to their department, right? You want to be proactive. You want to anticipate their needs, right? So those people who are difficult, right, be proactive in terms of communication, be proactive in terms of checking in. Ask them, we've got a meeting that's happening tomorrow. Are you able to come? If you're not able to come, can you please send in a 2IC if that's possible, right? So you want to be proactive. You want to be able to anticipate their needs so you can win them over, right? Again, when it comes to communication, you want to tailor the communication specifically for them, right? That might mean you might need to meet them one-on-one. You might need to meet them, regularly to give them updates, right? And you want to be able to explain progress, and very important, right? In projects, sometimes projects go over quite a number of months, depending on the methodology that you're using, right? So you want to be able to highlight any key wins or positive quick wins that you've achieved as a project team, or any value that you've delivered, because I find that motivates your stakeholders to be on top of the situations and to come to the plate, right? So difficult stakeholders, you will always have difficult stakeholders in your projects. If you haven't, but this is very important to gear yourself in terms of how do I manage difficult stakeholders. If I again take an example of a project that I worked on, right? I think we're a newly formed team. There was low confidence in the team in terms of what can this team really deliver, what they need to deliver. And what we did from day one is we scheduled meetings on a weekly basis with key stakeholder groups, going into there and really understanding what was causing, what were their pain points, right, with regards to the specific products that we were operating on, right? So really involving them upfront, understanding those pain points, right? And then they saw that we've got an active interest in what they were doing. We were listening, right? Listening is one of those skills. I'll get to the soft skills that are needed for stakeholder management, but listening is one of those skills where you want someone to see that you are actually listening to what they're saying. You've got a vested interest to make their lives, their operations better, right? Those are the kind of things that can win you over. And within time, right, we started really to gain buy-in. We started to get winning from these stakeholders, right? Also speaking their lingo, understanding their language, understanding what is going on in their business, right? Having that conversation, right? So there's extra work. When we think of project management, I think we're thinking it's just managing a project to make sure, we deliver. But as a project manager, I believe that, it's very important to really get down into the detail, understand, right, their language, understand their pain points in order to win them over, right? And get that project success that everyone is looking for, and not become one of the statistics. right? Let's talk about skills, right? Mackenzie, I see there's a question. I'm going to turn. Should we answer that or should we go ahead and leave it towards the end?
We can answer it if you'd like.
Okay.
It says, how do you measure the level of interest in stakeholders based on your own observations and assumptions, or should we ask them directly how interested they are?
Great question. Thank you. Thank you. All right. I think what's important is definitely based on your own observations, right? You want to be able, I think when we think about communication, one of the key things is body language and the way people talk, right? So from your observations, you are able to see whether someone is a bit resistant to the change, right, or not. So really observe, because sometimes when you do ask people, right, especially most of the time you'll be in workshops. Let's face it, as project managers, you're in workshops, you're in forums. People aren't going to have enough confidence to speak up, right? Because maybe their managers are in it, or maybe they don't want to be seen as if they're adverse towards the organization. So you want to observe as a project manager. Again, I'll get to the skills. We're on the skills right now, right? You want to be able to observe body language. You want to be able to listen. I spoke about listening. Listen to what they're saying, right? Observe their body language, right? Make a note of it and then put it down, right? Interact with them frequently. I know nowadays people ask me, but Tendai, we're on video, we're remote, most of the time we're remote, right? Again, in workshops, you want people to be able to switch on their cameras. I mean, you want to be able to see people, because sometimes virtual makes this additional layer, right, of screens and everything, makes it very difficult, right? So you want to be able to observe. I hope that answered your question, whoever that was. So let's move. Okay, we're going to move now to the skills that are needed for effective stakeholder management, right? When it comes to skills, I think there's a chart from the World Economic Forum, right, that speaks to the top, I think it's 10 skills of 2025, right? What's interesting is that most of these soft skills and the hard skills that are required for project managers are listed on that specific, graph, if I remember it correctly, right? So these skills, cannot underestimate them. They are so important, right? Let's start with the soft skills, communication, right? Communication, not verbal. Like I said, you want to also see body language and so forth, right? As a PM, really communicating clearly, right? Concisely, understanding your stakeholders, right? Listening to understand rather listening to respond, right? I've got favorite book, Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that I read. And one of the things is you want to seek first to understand before being understood. That's one of the habits that he's listed, right? So really understand and then respond, right? Most of the time we are listening to respond rather than to understand, right? Collaboration skills, again, very important. Like I said, most of the time as a project manager, you're collaborating with so many different people, right? So those interpersonal skills, very important. A lot of people ask me, I'm an introvert, can I become a project manager? By all means, right? Collaboration does not mean you need to be an extrovert. It doesn't mean that you need to be outgoing, right? It's just the way that you communicate and the way that you engage, right? Relationship building skills. I think I mentioned to say that all of the relationships that we're going to have as a project manager with our stakeholders, right? It's a continuous engagement that we have with our stakeholders. So you want to make sure that you maintain relationship building skills, right? Negotiation and conflict resolution. There's going to come a time in your project where there is conflict, where you need to negotiate, right? This is a difficult skill set. I don't think a lot of us, to handle conflict, a lot of us shy from conflict, right? A lot of us, when it comes to negotiation, especially if you're dealing with senior managers, right? It's difficult, right? But it's a skill that you can learn to do. And it's a skill that I say as project managers, when you do see an opportunity, try and practice those skills, right? Leadership and influential skills, again, very important. You're a PM, you're leading projects, right? You have to influence. And very important is adaptability. Things change. Requirements that were here yesterday are not the same as today, right? I think we saw with the COVID pandemic, right, how things just took a turn, right? So you need to be able to adapt to any environment or to any changes that happen with your project, right? When it comes to hard skills, problem solving, analytical and critical thinking, again, very important. I said problem solving is getting down to the root cause, right? Analytical thinking is really bringing structure, is really looking at a specific problem or whatever it may be, right? And breaking it down into components that's really manageable, right? Critical thinking, being able to think about something from multiple lens, from different lens, right? Of course, planning and organizing as a project manager, very important, and monitoring monitoring skills, right? I've just put in these skills. There's so many skills for project managers. If you have a look at what the literature is telling us, right? There's a lot of skills, but I feel that given the career I've had, right, I've seen that these have shaped, right, the projects that I've been in, whether they be successful or not, right? But really they've helped a project manager, they've helped me, they've helped my team, right, in delivering what we are meant to deliver, right? So again, these are skills that, again, you can always learn as you are going through your projects, right? So in conclusion, when we're talking about the importance of stakeholder management, right, we're looking at stakeholder manager in that it really ensures a productive working relationship during the project, right? It ensures stakeholder agreement, right, with project objectives. Every single project will have a goal, it will have objectives. You want to make sure that your stakeholders are aware of those goals and objectives and they agree with them, right? Because those are your blueprint going forward throughout the whole project, right? It ensures stakeholders are supportive and satisfied. Like I said, you want to have stakeholders on your side. You want to make sure that they support your project, right? And then it ensures that those who may oppose the project, right, or its deliverables do not negatively impact project outcomes, right? I'm going to hand over to Mackenzie just to talk more about the courses that we offer at McEwan University School of Continuing Education, and then Mackenzie can hand it back to me.
Yeah, thank you, Tendai. I would also just take this time to say if anybody has any questions, you can maybe start popping them into the chat and the Q&A. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the courses that this material has come from, and then that'll give everybody a little bit of time to process if you have any thoughts for Tendai or for myself. So the material for today's webinar did come from the Working with Stakeholders course, which is part of our project management certificate here at McEwan School of Continuing Education. These courses run per term, so you could finish it in 4 months. You could also just take courses individually. If you just want to learn more about stakeholder management, you are welcome to take the one course. If you complete all the courses, you do earn a professional development certificate. And I know Tendai mentioned a couple times the project management body of knowledge, which is kind of the guiding book for principles and fundamentals for project managers, which was created by the International Project Management Institute. So all of these courses are freshly updated for the winter term to follow the brand new 7th edition of the PMBOK, which is very exciting. So I do have a link there if anybody's interested in checking out these courses. We would love to have you. Tendai teaches some of them, so you'd be with her again. And with that, I'll pass it back to Tendai and I'll watch for any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mackenzie. Thank you.